Hey legend, yes you, sitting there with your snack in hand, or maybe getting cozy under the blankets. Curious enough to watch just one more story tonight. Wherever you are, take a breath, lean in, and let me pull you into a tale that has haunted history for over 2,000 years. This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and a man whose shadow refuses to fade. Tonight, we step into the world of Julius Caesar, and what happened on the Ides of March is more than history. It's a mystery you'll feel in your bones. The sun rose over Rome that morning, calm and golden, but inside the marble halls of the Senate, a storm of whispers and tension waited. March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March was a date that would echo through history. A day when the fate of the Republic hung by a thread. Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered nations and defied empires, was about to step into a trap carefully woven by those he once called friends. Yet some wondered, did he sense it? Could a man as brilliant as Caesar have ignored the warning signs, or was he walking willingly into destiny? Weeks earlier, a seer had warned him plainly, beware the Ides of March. Caesar had laughed, brushing it off like a child swatting at a fly. He had stared down armies, led legions across impossible rivers, and survived plots that would have destroyed lesser men. How could a single date intimidate him? And yet, fate has a way of mocking even the strongest, of turning courage into tragedy. That warning lingered, like a shadow trailing his every step through the streets of Rome. At home, Calpurnia, his wife, had tried to change his mind. In the dark hours before dawn, she dreamt of a statue of Caesar spouting blood, with citizens washing their hands in it. She pleaded with him, urging caution, begging him to stay. Caesar considered it. For a moment, fear touched the edges of his mind, but Rome demanded him. Decimus Brutus insisted, and ambition drowned hesitation. The choice to leave home that morning was the first step toward history's most infamous betrayal. Inside the Senate chamber, the air was thick with pretense. Senators, faces familiar yet deadly, surrounded him under the cold light of the hall. 23 knives, hidden until the perfect moment, awaited their command, and as the first blade struck, shock rippled through the chamber, mingled with the inevitability of betrayal. Caesar's gaze fell upon Brutus, the man he trusted above all, the one whose loyalty he had never doubted. In that heartbeat, the line between friend and foe vanished, and the Republic itself trembled, teetering on the edge of chaos. With a whisper that would haunt centuries, Caesar breathed, "A tu, brute." The words carried disbelief, sorrow, and resignation all at once. His body fell, but the story did not end, it had just begun. The Ides of March became more than a date. It became a symbol of ambition, loyalty, and the cruel hand of fate. As Rome reeled from the shock, questions lingered. Could the warning have saved him? Was there a choice, or had destiny already drawn the map? And above all, in the quiet after the screams and chaos, one truth remained: Julius Caesar had entered history not just as a ruler, but as a legend shrouded in mystery. Long before the Ides of March, long before the Senate chamber became a stage of betrayal, Julius Caesar was just a boy growing up in Rome. But even then, ambition stirred within him like a quiet flame. Born into a patrician family with noble blood, Caesar's life seemed set on a conventional path, yet he wanted more than comfort or inheritance. He craved greatness, recognition, and a mark on the world that no ordinary man could leave. It was this hunger that would shape him, mold him, and eventually place him at the center of history's most gripping mysteries. From a young age, Caesar displayed a sharp mind and fearless nature. Stories tell of him riding into danger, studying the art of oratory, and seeking alliances with men far older and wiser. He learned quickly that power in Rome was never given, it was seized, negotiated, or stolen. Every choice, every word, every glance became a stepping stone. And yet, even with ambition blazing in his eyes, he carried a caution that only the cleverest possess. He understood loyalty and betrayal as two sides of the same coin. This balance of daring and calculation would later become both his weapon and his vulnerability. Political life called to him early. Caesar joined the military and then entered the cursus honorum Rome's ladder of political offices with a combination of charm, strategy, and sheer audacity. Each victory, each speech, and each alliance strengthened his network and widened his influence. But beneath the public achievements, he moved like a shadow in the alleys of power, reading intentions, noting weaknesses, and planning several steps ahead. The young Caesar was not merely ambitious, he was relentless, a man who could see both the battlefield and the Senate chamber as stages for conquest. Yet ambition alone could not have prepared him for the twists of fate that awaited. Family connections, political rivals, and dangerous enemies constantly threatened to unravel his progress. Caesar's uncle by marriage, Gaius Marius, and the turbulent political climate of Rome forced him to navigate carefully, balancing risk with cunning. His resilience and resourcefulness allowed him to survive purges, scandals, and betrayals that would have crushed any ordinary man. In every challenge, the young Caesar learned lessons that would later define him, lessons about power, survival, and the thin line between trust and treachery. By the time he rose into the spotlight, the boy from a patrician house had transformed into a force no one could ignore. The ambition that once glimmered quietly within him now burned bright and unstoppable. Every step he took was calculated, every word measured, and every action a statement of intent. And yet, behind this brilliance lay the same mystery that would haunt his death. How much of his rise was fate, how much was strategy, and how much was sheer will? The seeds of greatness were sown in these early years, and the story of Caesar's ambition had only just begun. The roar of the Gallic tribes echoed across the forests and rivers long before Caesar's legions arrived, yet he was not intimidated. Even as a commander, Caesar possessed a calm calculation that unsettled both allies and enemies alike. Every march, every maneuver, every camp he established was executed with precision and purpose. He understood war as more than a clash of swords. It was a game of psychology, perception, and control. The battlefield became his theater, and he its master. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul were relentless. From the dense forests of Germania to the banks of the Rhine, he faced enemies who were fierce, resourceful, and familiar with their terrain. Yet his brilliance lay not just in brute force, but in innovation. Bridges were built overnight, rivers crossed with ingenuity, and surprise attacks executed with flawless timing. Each victory expanded his reputation, not merely as a soldier, but as a strategist who could bend the chaos of war into an instrument of his will. And as word of his triumphs spread across Rome, admiration and envy followed in equal measure. But conquest was never just about territory, it was about power and image. Caesar understood that the Senate and the people of Rome would judge him not only by victories, but by how he presented them. He wrote letters and reports, later collected in Commentary de Beo Gallico, portraying himself as both heroic and fair, a general beloved by his troops and feared by his enemies. Yet behind the polished narratives lay brutal realities, entire tribes subdued, cities razed, and countless lives sacrificed for the sake of ambition. Here, Caesar's genius intertwined with moral ambiguity, a theme that would echo through history. Amid the victories, whispers of envy and fear began to circulate back in Rome. Pompey, Crassus, and other political heavyweights watched carefully as Caesar's influence grew with each campaign. He was no longer merely a military hero. He was a symbol of possibility, a man who defied norms and expectations. His soldiers loved him for leading from the front, but rivals feared the same courage and decisiveness that made him extraordinary. The line between loyalty and treachery was thin, and the shadows of political intrigue followed him even into the farthest reaches of Gaul. By the end of his campaigns, Caesar had not only expanded Rome's territories, but had cemented his status as a legendary figure whose ambition and intellect would be remembered for centuries. His military genius, however, came with a hidden cost. Every victory added to the fears of those in power, those who would later conspire to end his life. The stage was set for political conflict, and the seeds of betrayal were sown even as the Gallic fields ran red. Caesar's conquests were more than battles. They were a testament to the complexity of power, ambition, and destiny, and a harbinger of the mysteries yet to unfold in Rome's marble. Even as the echoes of his victories in Gaul reached Rome, Caesar understood that military success alone would not secure lasting power. Politics demanded a different kind of cunning, a game of alliances, manipulation, and perception. The corridors of the Senate were no less dangerous than the battlefields of Gaul. Whispers, rivalries, and ambitions twisted through marble halls like serpents. Caesar had learned to navigate them carefully, yet every move he made drew both admiration and envy. His rise was inevitable, yet every step carried the weight of potential betrayal. He formed alliances with some of Rome's most influential figures, Crassus, Pompey building a network that would become the backbone of his political strength. Public speeches, carefully orchestrated appearances, and gestures of generosity cemented his image among the people. Caesar knew that in Rome, reputation could be as deadly as a sword. He presented himself as a defender of the Republic, yet his growing influence began to unsettle those who clung to the old order. Every calculated smile, every subtle negotiation, was a chess move in a game that few could anticipate. But ambition has a way of forcing decisions that defy caution. In 49 BC, faced with the Senate's orders to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar made a choice that would change history forever. Crossing the Rubicon River with his legions, he declared war on the Republic itself. "The die is cast," he reportedly said, embracing both defiance and inevitability. This single act, bold and irreversible, transformed him from a general into a symbol of power and rebellion. It was a line drawn not in sand, but in blood and destiny. The consequences were immediate and profound. Rome braced for civil war, families divided, and loyalties tested as the Republic teetered on the brink. Caesar's opponents, including Pompey, fled the city, leaving a vacuum of power that he would step into decisively. Yet even in triumph, the political landscape remained treacherous. Allies could turn into enemies, admiration could morph into fear, and every action carried echoes of consequence. Caesar understood that crossing the Rubicon was not merely a military maneuver, it was a commitment to a fate intertwined with both glory and danger. By the time he entered Rome as the victor, Caesar had transformed himself into more than a man. He was a force that reshaped the Republic. His actions blurred the line between savior and conqueror, between hero and threat. Every gesture, every decree, and every calculated move intensified both his power and the fears of those around him. The Rubicon had been crossed, not just as a river, but as a threshold into legend and conspiracy. And while Caesar stood at the apex of his ascent, shadows of betrayal and intrigue loomed ever closer, preparing the stage for the Ides of March that would forever define his legacy. By the time Julius Caesar declared himself dictator for life, Rome was a city transformed, teetering between reverence and fear. Streets buzzed with whispers. Citizens marveled at his presence. Yet senators trembled in private chambers. Power, once abstract, now rested squarely in Caesar's hands. He wielded it with intelligence, vision, and sometimes ruthless efficiency. Every reform, every law, every public act was calculated to consolidate his authority while projecting the image of a leader who cared for Rome's future. Caesar's reforms reshaped daily life, from the calendar that bears his name to policies that aided the poor and veterans. He reorganized the administration, centralized power, and offered opportunities for those loyal to him. The people adored him, and he became a living symbol of Rome's potential. Yet behind these achievements lurked unease. Many saw his accumulation of power as a threat to the Republic's ideals. Was Caesar a benevolent reformer or a man who quietly dismantled centuries of tradition to secure his own legacy? Even allies grew wary. Senators who had once supported him began plotting in silence. The question of monarchy haunted the elite. Caesar's acceptance of honors, public adulation, and gestures that hinted at divine status fueled their suspicions. Propaganda from rivals painted him as a tyrant, exaggerating ambition into menace. Caesar, aware of this tension, maintained a delicate balance, demonstrating generosity while suppressing opposition. Yet the shadows of distrust stretched ever closer, waiting for a moment to strike. Every triumph came with risks. The very popularity that safeguarded him among the people amplified the envy and fear within the Senate. Decisions once celebrated could be reframed as arrogance. Alliances could crumble at a whisper. And in the midst of this, Caesar continued to advance his vision of Rome, expanding infrastructure, reforming governance, and demonstrating the brilliance that had earned him fame on the battlefield. Power, he understood, was as fragile as it was intoxicating. At the pinnacle of his career, Caesar became more than a man. He became a force of history. His presence commanded loyalty, his decisions shaped destiny, and his ambition inspired awe and dread alike. But with power came peril, and those who felt threatened began weaving conspiracies that would ultimately end his life. Caesar's peak was as magnificent as it was precarious. Every reform, every decree, every public act carried the seeds of admiration and betrayal alike. Rome's destiny and Caesar's teetered on the edge of an inevitable climax. The streets of Rome buzzed with unease, though the citizens could not yet name the cause. Behind the marble walls of the Senate, a darker current ran deep, a conspiracy that had been brewing in whispers for months. Caesar's extraordinary power, his reforms, and his growing aura of near divinity had unsettled the old guard. Senators who once pledged loyalty now debated in secret chambers how to restore what they believed the Republic had lost. In this shadowed theater, loyalty was fragile, and ambition took on a deadly edge. Cassius, a senator known for cunning and resentment, became the architect of the conspiracy. He saw in Caesar not a leader to admire, but a tyrant to destroy. His persuasion extended to Brutus, whose sense of duty and idealism made him vulnerable to manipulation. Brutus loved Caesar like a father, yet the conspirators convinced him that the murder was necessary to save the Republic. The tension was exquisite. A man torn between friendship, family loyalty, and political principle. knowing that history would judge his choice long before Rome would. Plans were made with precision, secrecy, and ritual. The conspirators timed their attack for the Senate session on the Ides of March, believing that in that hall, with Caesar surrounded, their act would have both maximum impact and symbolic resonance. Each member had a role, a blade hidden under their togas, and a heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The plot was not spontaneous, it was the product of strategy, fear, and a belief in destiny's cruel irony. Every step, every word, every glance became part of a story that had been written long before the daggers struck. Even within this deadly circle, uncertainty lingered. Brutus hesitated, weighing his love for Caesar against the ideals of Rome. Cassius pressed on relentlessly, appealing to honor and duty. The conspirators understood that history would remember the act as both liberation and murder, and yet they believed it necessary. The air was thick with tension, every moment a countdown to the inevitable. In those hours, Caesar moved unaware, walking into a trap he might have sensed but chose to face anyway, the greatest gamble of his life. When the day finally arrived, the conspirators surrounded Caesar in the Senate, and the blades flashed under the Roman sunlight. 23 strikes, each deliberate, each filled with fury, fear, all moral justification. And when Caesar saw Brutus among them, the world seemed to pause. The betrayal cut deeper than any weapon could, marking not only the end of a life, but the collapse of trust and the fragile illusion of loyalty. In that instant, Rome's republic was shaken to its core, leaving behind questions of duty, ambition, and fate, questions that would echo through history and haunt every telling of Caesar's story. The Ides of March ended, but the story of Julius Caesar did not. Rome reeled from shock, mourning a man whose ambition had both inspired and terrified. Streets once filled with applause were now hushed, shadows of fear and uncertainty stretching across the city. Yet, in the chaos, a new narrative began to take shape, one that transformed Caesar from a fallen ruler into a symbol, a figure larger than life, whose presence would be felt for centuries to come. His death was not the end. It was the beginning of a legend. In the immediate aftermath, power shifted quickly. Caesar's followers, loyal and determined, ensured that his reforms, honors, and vision would not vanish. His adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus, would rise from the turmoil, consolidating authority and claiming the title of princeps. The republic Caesar had fought for remained, but in form only. His legacy had paved the way for the empire, the transformation of Rome into a force that would dominate the ancient world. Every decree, every conquest, every act of leadership became part of the framework for generations to come. Yet Caesar's immortality was more than political. Stories of the comet that appeared after his death, Caesar's comet spread across Rome, interpreted as a sign that he had ascended among the gods. Poets, historians, and senators alike debated the meaning, blending fact and myth until the man and the legend became inseparable. His life, death, and the dramatic betrayal of the Ides of March created a narrative that transcended history, inspiring rulers, generals, and dreamers for centuries. Caesar became an archetype of ambition, power, and the human struggle between destiny and choice. Through the centuries, his name echoed in languages and cultures. Caesar, Kaiser, saw each a reminder of authority, influence, and the allure of greatness. From Napoleon to modern leaders, the image of Caesar remained a benchmark, a ghost of ambition, a lesson in both triumph and hubris. The mysteries that surrounded his life, his motives, his decisions, his final moments continue to spark debate, ensuring that no telling of history could ever be complete without him. His legacy was as much a puzzle as it was a blueprint for power. Julius Caesar's story is a mirror to humanity itself. Ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and the quest for immortality. The man who walked into the Senate on that fateful day was mortal, vulnerable, and betrayed. Yet the ideas he embodied, the power he wielded, and the myth that grew from his death endure. In the silence after the screams, in the whispers that followed through Rome's streets, one truth remained: Caesar was gone, but his shadow would never fade. History remembered him not merely as a ruler, but as a mystery that would challenge, inspire, and haunt every generation that came after. Julius Caesar's story is a reminder that power, ambition, and destiny are inseparable. A man who rose from a determined youth to a legendary general and a ruler who reshaped Rome, only to fall victim to betrayal by those he trusted most. His life and death blur the line between heroism and tragedy, leaving behind mysteries that echo through time. From the Ides of March to the comet that marked his passing, Caesar's legacy endures as both a lesson and a legend, a tale of ambition and betrayal that continues to captivate, haunt, and inspire every generation that dares to remember him. If you're a legend who CIVs more mysteries like this, hit that subscribe button, join the About Mystery family, and step deeper into the shadows of history with us.